yeah, the age of AI is, whether we like it or not, upon us. I do take that point that um, the resisting this stuff is pointless. However, um, people often talk about the term Luddite, and they talk about the Luddites, the Luddite movement, and this is a sort of pejorative thing of all the Luddites. They resisted, new developments in technology.
What does that
Actually,
mean, Luddite? Is it sort of stuck in the past, fuddy-duddy?
yes,
Is that what it
as I
means?
understand, I'm no historian, but as I understand it, the Luddites, when the automated looms came in that could weave automatically, so automatic powered looms, the Luddites protested against that because, of course, it would cause huge job losses among that industry, and so they sort of went on a protest march, and some of them smashed some of these infrastructures and so on. However, the Luddites were, you've got to realize there was an effect to that was voicing a concern, and that concern started to get taken seriously. Well, what do we do with all of these people who are going to be out of a job? So the idea, there's a difference between understanding technology is going to change and wanting to adapt, and just lying back and letting it roll over you and not appreciating that this is going to have damaging effects on society. What's interesting when you read these reports, which I've read quite a few of, about what will happen to the job market after, in the AI future, they talk about job creation. They're very happy to talk about job creation. The one term you will never see in any of those reports is losses of jobs. It's always job displacement.
Yeah.
Oh, well, the jobs will
Yes.
be displaced. Now, long term, yes, the jobs will be displaced. Human beings have a way of finding new work when new things happen. And also, we have the ultimate lever when we can't find work, which is population decline. Can't support a population, people don't have kids. So we'll work it out. Don't get me wrong, humanity will work it out in the long term. But in the short term, in the immediate term, in our lifetime terms, job losses are going to happen. And I worry that people are talking about AI and its effect on jobs aren't being honest and open and saying there will be losses. Let's deal with that. How do we deal with that?
And I'm very interested in the temperature around this, because I feel some of the comments that Alice spotted, pardon me, were getting heated in a way that we haven't had before. Particularly around AI and just the chat around AI. I found that one of them was like, "Oh, for a boomer, you're just getting excited about AI stuff that we didn't we've been using for years." And part of my job as sort of introducing and comparing this podcast is to ask rhetorical questions that I know the answer of. I have actually been dealing with AI personally at a commercial level for years, and I'm a big fan of it, but I also see that it's dangerous. We found that we were talking last week about a new AI model that started to threaten its engineers if the engineers were going to turn it off. So it's obviously damaging. Like any kind of industrial revolution, it's going to be it's got benefits and costs, but you're getting a lot of polemic. Personally, I am artistic. I have an artistic background, but I'm a dreadful artist. And for me, AI art unlocks something that enables me to express myself and use the AI as kind of remote hands. And, Igor in this studio is constantly finding ways of dressing me up with, various AI auto-generated images, even while we're just talking on air. I am quite we are tracking AI in cybercrime, and we're seeing it being used more and more in phishing attacks and things like that, and how AI can be employed to actually help the fight against cybercrime as well. So, like you, I feel you're in the middle. Is that right?
Yeah, look, as a journalist, you're sort of professionally in the middle. You don't tend to sort of have views either way. And also, I think we're just too early in this. The other thing I would point out is technology is massively susceptible to hype cycles. When I first joined Channel 4 News, for example, the big hype was 3D printing. Remember that?
Yes,
We
I
were
do.
all going to have a 3D printer, and it would change everything.
And we would be
Chairs.
printing guns and missile launchers, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we, a whole bunch of stuff on that. Then it was big data. Then the metaverse. Do you remember the metaverse? That was a big
Yes.
I
thing.
really
wasn't it?
want to chip in here just to sort of speak to the other perspective of AI. The kind of what I'm increasingly feeling is that I'm in a bit of a bubble working in tech, where we all just kind of use AI all the time and it's just really commonplace. And I've noticed that some of my friends who are kind of a similar age to me in the sort of millennially Gen Z kind of demographic, there's a whole community of people out there who are very politically engaged, who are really, really anti-AI. And I've sort of got two thoughts about this. I'd be really interested to hear what you have to say, Jeff, of kind of, obviously there's the environmental concerns. Their concerns are not the same as the ones that we have. When we're talking here about stuff like job losses, and people in this kind of community are sort of like, we don't care about jobs, we care about the planet burning, and you're just using this planet burning resource to generate stuff that looks crap. And you're stealing all this data from artists who have worked their whole careers, and so there's, rather than a job loss, it's more like, stealing intellectual property. But then I also kind of feel some of it, personally, I feel is possibly quite reactive, and possibly as a product of growing up, hearing all these things. I'm young, but I'm old enough to remember like .com millionaires, and there was this whole promise of like all the social media apps, and that they were these geniuses who had invented these apps, and it was all going to change the world. And then to feel like as we've become adults, that illusion has really been broken. And I sort of am sensing this idea of like being quite resistant automatically to be like, oh, well, I'm not going to get all excited about that because it's going to be like 3D printers, like you said. It's just, why bother? And I also wonder if maybe there's an element of kind of virtue signaling, of being like jumping on something, that you can kind of say like, oh, that's really harmful. Because there's lots of people who don't use AI at all, who've never used it before, and they've got some of these strong opinions. So I'd be really interested to hear what you think about this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, on the sort of creative side, it's interesting. I did ask my publisher about this, published a couple of books, and said, well, what about AI? What's the sort of, what are the rules here? And they said, well, of course, we as your publisher, before we use AI to sort of replicate your books, duplicate your books or whatever, we would always sort of ask your permission to do that. And I was like, well, that's very encouraging. You're not the ones I'm worried about. The ones I'm worried about, the people who just take the PDF of my book, scrape it, and then... So I started thinking, well, what would happen then? I've got 3 books out. It's not difficult to replicate my writing style. It's not difficult to replicate the subject that I write on. The story's sort of out there. I was thinking, well, it's entirely possible for an AI to write a Jeff White book. But then the question would be, well, what would be in it? I mean, you can cobble together the stuff I do. You can probably, the Bybit hack, the most recent hack, the 1.5 billion attributed to North Korea. You could sort of write a Jeff White book about that. That would be okay. But what I do, the whole point, I'm an investigative journalist, is I try and find out the stuff that's new and that's not been told yet. You've got to realize with AI, one of the key things to know about it and understand about it is, like a lot of technology, it is algorithmic. It's using an algorithm to generate. This generative AI is using an algorithm, and other types of AI are as well. That is backward looking. You look back at what's happened, you look back at patterns, and you look back at reports on the internet, and then you generate something new. I have no interest in what's happened. I have no interest in what's been out there. I have no interest in what everybody else knows and has done and published. I want to know the thing that hasn't been told. Where's the story that hasn't been told? Who's the person that hasn't spoken? What are the dots that have not been joined? And that's what I write a book about. So what I hope is, in my personal case, the stuff that I do is still of worth because it's investigative. And the other thing I'd point out is the AI debate about creativity and putting stuff out does remind me a bit of another phase we went through with technology in news, which was the idea of citizen journalism. There were all these people blogging about stuff, and there was this sense, certainly palpable sense in the newsrooms I worked in, of, well, these people know way more than I do about, aeronautics or viruses. Or, I mean, COVID was a perfect thing. You've got journalists trying to explain coronaviruses, and you've got academics writing blogs who've studied it for years. What are you going to read? And so this idea of, well, who needs journalists now? We've got citizen journalism. What actually happened then was the zone got flooded with shit, for want of a better word, of crap. And the people like the BBC and Channel 4 News who had got a reputation and who actually did the work and vetted this rose up to the top. Because, you can read like 6,000 articles on the internet that are all bollocks, or you can go to somebody who's actually done the job of research.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think maybe the same with AI. We will see an explosion of just
we like
AI.
a moral panic.